The night air in Afghanistan's Kunar province carried the metallic scent of coming rain. Black mountains loomed against a starless sky as six figures moved like shadows through the rocky terrain. Their night vision equipment gave the world an eerie green glow, turning the landscape into an alien dreamscape of jagged edges and hidden threats. Staff Sergeant Michael Torres raised his fist, the universal signal to halt. The squad froze mid-step, weapons-ready senses straining against the darkness. Something felt wrong. The intel had promised a clear approach to the compound, but Torres's instincts, honed through 3 combat tours, screamed danger. "Sierra Actual, this is Ghost Lead," he whispered into his comms. "Something's off. Request permission to abort and reassess." The radio crackled. A voice clinical and distant from the safety of a command center hundreds of miles away responded with cold certainty. "Negative, Ghost Lead. Intelligence confirms minimal resistance. Continue with the mission. Command out." Torres exchanged looks with his second-in-command. They'd been ordered forward by officers who'd never set foot in this valley, who couldn't feel the wrongness hanging in the air like the coming storm. "Roger that," Torres finally responded, knowing argument was futile. Moving to objective. They advanced 20 more yards when the night erupted in gunfire. Muzzle flashes transformed the darkness into strobing chaos. 2 team members fell immediately. Torres felt a hammer blow to his chest as a round struck his plate carrier. He returned fire on instinct, dragging a wounded comrade behind a rock outcropping as bullets chipped stone around them. Ambush! Fall back to position Delta," he shouted, but the tactical retreat was already compromised. 3 insurgents appeared on their flank, cutting off the escape route, weapons raised for killing shots. What happened next occurred so quickly it seemed like a hallucination. A shadow detached from the darkness, smaller than the others, moving with fluid precision. The first insurgent went down with a single shot. The second turned but found his rifle suddenly redirected upward as a combat knife flashed once in the moonlight. The third raised his weapon only to have it torn from his grasp before a precisely placed strike collapsed his windpipe. 3 enemies neutralized in under 5 seconds. The shadow figure turned. Night vision revealed a face partially obscured by tactical gear, but unmistakably feminine. The team's newest member, the one some had privately questioned, now stood over 3 fallen enemies, her breathing controlled and steady. "Area clear," she stated simply, already moving to assess Torres's wound. "We need extraction. Now." The camera suddenly pans away from the chaos of Afghanistan, the scene dissolving into brilliant Southern California sunshine. The date stamp appears: Naval Amphibious Base Coronado 2025. So, the asphalt training ground baked under the midday sun. Sailors and junior officers formed a wide circle, their shadows stretching like spokes of a wheel toward its center. The mood was tense, anticipatory, as they watched the hand-to-hand combat demonstration unfold. In the center stood Petty Officer First Class Alexandra. Alex Kowalski, 5'6", 130 pounds. Her dark hair pulled into a regulation bun, so severe it seemed to pull her skin taut across her cheekbones. Her expression betrayed nothing. No emotion, no strain, no response to the increasingly agitated figure circling her like a predator. Captain James Harrison, 30 years in the Navy with a chest full of ribbons earned primarily behind desks, watched with mounting disapproval. At 56, his once powerful frame had softened around the edges, but his voice retained the commanding boom that had intimidated subordinates throughout his career. A Desert Storm veteran, he had built his reputation through immaculate paperwork and flawless inspection results rather than battlefield acumen. "Again," Harrison barked at the young seaman partnered with Kowalski. "And this time make it count." The seaman, barely out of A school and visibly uncomfortable, lunged forward with a telegraphed right hook. Kowalski parried with textbook precision, redirecting his momentum while barely appearing to move. The young man stumbled past her, catching himself before he fell. Harrison's face darkened like an approaching squall. "Struck her in the jaw," he shouted, the words laced with contempt. "That's what a real threat would do, Petty Officer. Not this dancing. What are they teaching you in whatever backwater program you crawled out of?" A ripple moved through the watching crowd. Nervous snickers, quickly stifled shuffling feet, averted eyes. The laughter wasn't malicious. It was reflexive. The deeply ingrained instinct to align with power. In the rigid hierarchy of military life, a captain's displeasure was something to be avoided at all costs. Kowalski didn't flinch. She didn't scowl. Her face remained a mask of placid neutrality. She simply blinked, a slow, deliberate motion as if clearing a mote of dust from her eye. Her focus was not on Harrison's red face but on her own hands, which she slowly unclenched and then clenched again. Not in anger but in a quiet rhythmic reset. She stood in what martial artists call zanshin, a lingering awareness, a state of relaxed readiness that existed before, during, and after the execution of technique. Her breathing remained even almost inaudible, a stark contrast to Harrison's increasingly aggressive posturing. 100 yards away, partially concealed in the shadow of a Humvee Master Chief, Petty Officer William Sullivan observed the unfolding scene with growing concern. At 61, Sullivan was a living legend in the naval special warfare community, a man whose career spanned from Cold War operations to the global war on terror. His weathered face mapped 4 decades of service in the world's most dangerous places, each line a story few would ever hear. When Sullivan looked at Kowalski, he didn't see what Harrison saw. Where the captain perceived hesitation, Sullivan recognized controlled precision. Where Harrison saw weakness, Sullivan identified lethal capability held deliberately in check. What he witnessed wasn't failure, it was mastery, and it filled him with a cold dread, not for Kowalski, but for the captain, whose arrogance was about to collide with a reality he was utterly unprepared to face. Harrison continued his tirade, his voice a bullhorn of condescension that stripped dignity from the afternoon air. "Look at this," he bellowed, gesturing to Kowalski with a dismissive wave. "Is this what special warfare is sending us now? Someone who hesitates. Someone who can't even handle a basic simulated engagement with a training partner. Half her size in the real world, hesitation gets you killed. It gets your team killed. Do you understand me, Petty Officer?" Kowalski's training partner looked mortified. He had executed the prescribed move as instructed, and she had performed a perfect parry and slip, a fluid motion that redirected his momentum and left him off balance. It was textbook. It was flawless. But to Harrison, it wasn't aggressive enough. It wasn't loud enough. It lacked the theatrical violence he equated with strength. He saw her economy of motion as timidity, her precision as weakness. He was a man who understood force only as a blunt instrument, and he was witnessing a surgeon's scalpel utterly failing to comprehend its purpose or its power. The sun beat down, reflecting off the polished brass on Harrison's uniform, making him a beacon of indignant authority. The onlookers felt the heat, the oppressive weight of the captain's anger, and the profound, uncomfortable silence emanating from the woman at its center. Kowalski's silence was not empty. It was dense, a gravity well that seemed to absorb all the noise Harrison threw at it. Her eyes, deep unreadable brown, were not locked on the captain's angry face. They were slightly defocused, taking in the entire scene, noting the position of the crowd, the shimmering heat rising from the pavement, the location of Master Chief Sullivan by the Humvee. 15 years earlier, another petty officer had stood before Captain Harrison. Then Lieutenant Commander Harrison had been leading a review board for the controversial Project Poseidon, a classified initiative exploring the integration of women into special operations roles. "This is a mistake," Harrison had declared, slapping a folder onto the conference table. "Women don't have the upper body strength, the psychological profile, or the killer instinct required for these operations." The other officers shifted uncomfortably as Harrison continued his diatribe, but none openly disagreed. The military was changing, but old attitudes died hard, especially in the insular world of special operations. "Sir," a junior intelligence officer had ventured, "the preliminary data suggests several female candidates have outperformed male counterparts in key areas, including marksmanship, tactical problem-solving, and stress endurance." Harrison had dismissed the comment with a wave. "Training scenarios aren't combat. When bullets start flying for real, you'll see the difference." That meeting had ended with Project Poseidon moving forward despite Harrison's objections. But his prejudice had planted a seed, one that would bear bitter fruit years later when he'd be responsible for operational decisions affecting the lives of those very women he'd deemed inadequate. Back on the sun-baked training ground, Harrison's fury grew with each passing moment of Kowalski's non-reaction. He interpreted her stillness as disrespect, her silence as insubordination. "I'm speaking to you, petty officer, Have you lost your hearing or just your nerve? He stepped closer, invading her personal space, his shadow falling across her. It was a classic intimidation tactic, one that worked on subordinates who feared the wrath of a superior officer. But Kowalski didn't even seem to register the proximity. Her gaze remained distant, her body utterly relaxed. The irony was a chasm deep and wide. Harrison was demanding a show of aggression from a woman who had likely seen more real violence in a single deployment than he had in his entire 20-year career. The assembled sailors could feel the injustice of it. They were not experts in hand-to-hand combat, but they were experts in the subtle language of military hierarchy. They knew they were witnessing a gross abuse of power, a public dressing down that was unprofessional and deeply personal. They saw a captain using his rank to humiliate someone who could not fight back. Not because she was unable, but because she was disciplined. And in that moment, their quiet sympathy began to shift toward the silent woman on the mat. They were beginning to understand that the real demonstration of strength wasn't happening in Harrison's loud shouting, but in Kowalski's profound, unshakable self-control. Her silence was becoming a shout louder than any of his insults, a testament to a level of discipline he couldn't begin to comprehend. In the shadow of the Humvee, Sullivan's mind flashed back to the first time he'd met Alexandra Kowalski. It had been during a specialized close-quarters battle course he'd overseen 5 years earlier. She had arrived with no fanfare, no special introduction, just another name on the roster. But he had noticed immediately how the other operators gave her a wide berth, as if unsure how to categorize her presence. On the first day of training, the skeptical chief petty officer had challenged her during a tactical entry drill. "You think you can clear a room with that frame? What happens when you meet resistance?" Kowalski had simply looked at him and asked, "Would you like me to demonstrate, Chief?" What followed was a masterclass in leverage, momentum, and precision. She had taken down the much larger instructor with such clean efficiency that the room had fallen completely silent. It wasn't just that she'd succeeded, it was that she'd made it look effortless. Afterwards, Sullivan had reviewed her file and discovered a troubling pattern. Despite exemplary performance evaluations, Kowalski's advancement had been consistently delayed. Commendations seemed to disappear into administrative black holes. Recommendations for special assignments were mysteriously rerouted. Someone somewhere didn't want Alexandra Kowalski to succeed, and yet here she was, still standing still, serving still silent in the face of institutional resistance. Sullivan had taken a special interest in her career after that demonstration, becoming an unofficial mentor. He recognized in her something rare, not just physical capability or tactical acumen, but the psychological fortitude that separated good operators from truly exceptional ones. What Sullivan didn't know, what would haunt him when he later learned the truth, was that Kowalski had been present during his son's final mission in Afghanistan. Lieutenant Michael Sullivan had died securing the extraction of a compromised team, including a severely wounded female operator whose name had been redacted from all official reports. The disconnect between Harrison's perception and Kowalski's reality was the central unspoken drama unfolding on the training ground. He saw a flawed sailor. Sullivan saw a ghost of the Hindu Kush. Harrison saw a hesitant woman. Sullivan saw the cold calculation of a Tier 1 asset. Harrison was playing checkers, moving his pieces with loud, obvious threats. Kowalski, however, was playing three-dimensional chess, already 10 moves ahead, waiting patiently for him to make his final, fatal error in judgment. "Fine," Harrison spat, his voice dripping with contempt. "If you can't handle a simple drill, let's see how you handle something with a little more realism." He scanned the crowd, his eyes landing on Gunnery Sergeant Marcus Reynolds, a Marine Corps martial arts program instructor attached to the base. Reynolds was a mountain of a man, 6'4", with a neck as thick as a piling and hands that looked like they could crush coconuts. He was known for his intensity, for pushing trainees to their absolute breaking point. Reynolds was, in Harrison's mind, the perfect tool for this particular job. "Gunny, get on the mat." Reynolds, who had been watching the exchange with practiced stoicism, nodded once and began to remove his cover. He was a professional, and an order was an order. But a flicker of something, discomfort, perhaps even pity, crossed his face as he looked at Kowalski. He outweighed her by 100 pounds of solid muscle. This wasn't a training exercise. It was a public execution sanctioned by a captain's wounded pride. "The scenario is simple," Harrison announced to the hushed crowd. The gunny is a hostile combatant unarmed. You are objective petty officers to neutralize the threat. He emphasized his next words with cruel precision. No dancing, no hesitation, full contact. Is that clear? A murmur went through the assembled sailors. Full contact against Reynolds. It was a ludicrously unfair matchup designed for one purpose, to break her. In the sweltering heat of Helmand Province 4 years earlier, Petty Officer Kowalski had crouched behind the bullet-riddled wall of a compound gone quiet. Her team, callsign Ghost, had been ambushed during what should have been a routine intelligence-gathering operation. 3 of her teammates were already dead. The 4th Lieutenant Michael Sullivan lay beside her, a sucking chest wound making each breath a bloody struggle. Their extraction had been delayed. Command claimed weather issues, but she suspected political complications. They were on their own for at least 4 hours, surrounded by hostile forces who were systematically tightening the noose. You need to go, Sullivan had whispered, blood bubbling at the corner of his mouth. That's an order. Kowalski had checked her remaining ammunition. 2 magazines for her HK-416, 1 partial mag for her SIG P-26. Not enough to fight their way out, but perhaps enough to create a diversion. With respect, sir, that's not happening. What followed was an 18-hour ordeal that would later be redacted from all official reports. Using the skills she'd honed through years of specialized training, Kowalski had moved through enemy territory like a ghost, creating distractions, eliminating threats, and keeping Sullivan alive through sheer force of will. When the extraction team finally arrived, they found her standing over Sullivan's body. Not dead as they'd expected, but unconscious and stabilized. Around the compound lay evidence of her night's work, 8 enemy combatants neutralized with surgical precision. The senior officer on the extraction team had stared at her in disbelief. You did this alone. She had simply nodded once, then helped load Sullivan onto the helicopter. Later, when the mission report reached Captain Harrison's desk, then serving as a staff officer at CENTCOM, he had made a decision that would alter the course of multiple lives. He deleted Kowalski's name from the action report and reassigned credit to the extraction team. In his mind, it was simply impossible that a female operator had accomplished what the report described. The truth was too threatening to his worldview to be allowed to stand. Kowalski finally moved. She turned her head slightly, her eyes meeting Reynolds for the first time. There was no fear in her gaze, no anger. There was only a calm, analytical assessment. She gave him a short, almost imperceptible nod. It was not a gesture of submission, but of acknowledgement. It said, I see you, we are both professionals, let us do the job. She then turned her focus inward, beginning a subtle preparation that was invisible to Harrison, but glaringly obvious to Sullivan. Her shoulders rolled back, a minute adjustment that aligned her spine. Her fingers, which had been relaxed, now curled slightly, ready to grip. Her breathing, already controlled, deepened almost imperceptibly, oxygenating her muscles for the explosive effort to come. She settled into her stance, sinking her weight just a fraction of an inch, rooting herself to the mat. It was not preparing for a fight, but a master craftsman picking up their tools. There was a reverence in her movements, a deep and abiding respect for the violence she was capable of, and a profound discipline in its application. A breath not for courage, but for oxygen. A glance not for weakness, but for angles. A shift not for escape, but for position. Each micro-movement was a sentence in a language of lethal efficiency that Harrison could not read. He saw only a woman standing still, and he smirked, convinced of his imminent victory. He had set the stage for her ultimate humiliation, never once considering that he had actually just set the stage for his own. The silence on the training ground was now absolute, thick with anticipation and dread. The only sound was the distant cry of gulls and the low hum of the bass. Reynolds took his position opposite her, the sheer physical disparity between them a stark, brutal fact. He was a wall of force. She was a whisper of potential. Harrison, satisfied, folded his arms across his chest. "Proceed, gunny!" he commanded, his voice booming with finality. Years earlier, during a classified briefing on Project Poseidon, Sullivan had witnessed a heated exchange between a senior Pentagon official and then Lieutenant Commander Harrison. The battlefield is evolving, the official had argued. Our adversaries don't care about gender. They care about effectiveness. We're limiting our operational capability by excluding 50% of the population from these roles. Harrison had remained unmoved. Some doors should remain closed. The presence of women changes unit dynamics, compromises operational security, and creates unnecessary risks. That's not what the data shows, the official countered, sliding a folder across the table. These test results demonstrate that properly selected and trained female operators can meet or exceed standards in critical areas. Harrison had pushed the folder away without opening it. Data doesn't bleed, data doesn't die. I won't risk American lives on a social experiment. Sullivan, observing silently, had recognized Harrison's objection for what it was, not a rational assessment of capability, but a visceral rejection of change. Harrison wasn't protecting standards. He was protecting a worldview. Now, watching Harrison orchestrate this public spectacle of humiliation, Sullivan recognized the same pattern. This wasn't about training or readiness or capability. This was about reinforcing a hierarchy that Harrison understood, one where people like Alexandra Kowalski remained firmly in their proper place. The gunnery sergeant did not waste time. He was a Marine and the order was to engage. He moved forward, not with a wild charge, but with the measured predatory gait of an experienced fighter. He was testing her, watching her reactions, his massive frame closing the distance with deceptive speed. Reynolds had fought in dozens of real combat situations. He had trained hundreds of Marines in hand-to-hand combat techniques. He knew better than almost anyone present the brutal reality of close-quarters fighting. And he recognized immediately that something about Kowalski was different. Her stillness wasn't fear, it was assessment. Her silence wasn't intimidation, it was focus. He feinted with his left hand, a quick jab meant to draw her attention, while his right hand coiled back, ready to deliver a powerful, stunning blow, the very strike to the jaw the captain had so loudly demanded. The crowd held its collective breath. This was it, the moment of impact, the moment of failure. But the impact never came. As Reynolds' right hand shot forward, a blur of muscle and intent, Kowalski moved. It wasn't a retreat, it wasn't a block, it was something else entirely. She flowed. In the instant his fist began its journey, she took a small, lateral step, pivoting on the ball of her back foot. It was a movement of inches, but it changed the entire geometry of the confrontation. His punch, aimed at where her head had been, now sliced through empty air, its momentum carrying him forward and slightly off balance. In that same fluid motion, her left hand came up, not to strike, but to guide. Her open palm made contact with the back of his triceps, not with force, but with a firm, insistent pressure. She wasn't stopping his momentum. She was redirecting it, accelerating it, using his own power to fuel his downfall. The entire sequence took less than a second. To the untrained eye, it was a confusing blur. To Sullivan, it was poetry. He saw the principle of kuzushi, the art of unbalancing an opponent, executed with a level of mastery he had rarely witnessed outside the highest echelons of the special operations world. Reynolds, a formidable fighter in his own right, was suddenly a passenger in his own body. His forward momentum, now amplified and redirected by Kowalski, pulled him past her. As he stumbled, trying to regain his footing, she completed her pivot. Her body was now behind his in a position of absolute control. Before the big Marine could even begin to process what had happened, her right arm snaked around his thick neck, her bicep pressing against one carotid artery, the blade of her forearm against the other. Her left hand came up to lock onto her own bicep, cinching the hold tight. It was a perfect rear naked choke applied with the speed and precision of a striking viper. There was no struggle, no grunting, no desperate thrashing. Reynolds, caught completely by surprise, had time for a single sharp intake of breath before the world began to go dark. He knew the technique instantly. He knew its finality. He had a brief moment to appreciate the sheer terrifying efficiency of it before he tapped his hand frantically on her arm, the universal signal of submission. Kowalski held the choke for a fraction of a second longer, ensuring the signal was acknowledged, and then released him as quickly and smoothly as she had applied it. Reynolds, the human wrecking ball, crumpled to the mat, not unconscious, but utterly defeated, gasping for air, his face a mixture of shock and a strange newfound respect. The fight, if it could even be called that, was over. It had lasted perhaps 3 seconds. A deafening silence fell over the training ground, a vacuum of sound so profound it felt like a physical pressure. The snickers were gone. The nervous energy was gone. All that remained was a stunned, collective awe. Kowalski simply stepped back. Her breathing unchanged, her expression as placid as it had been before the engagement. She stood over the defeated Marine not in triumph, but in the same state of calm readiness. Harrison's jaw was literally agape. His face, which had been flushed with anger, was now pale with disbelief. His mind struggled to process the scene before him, the tiny, unimposing woman, the giant defeated Marine, the impossible speed, the silent, effortless victory. No, he whispered the single word of flimsy defense against the tidal wave of reality crashing down upon him. That's not possible. And into this tableau of stunned silence, Master Chief Sullivan began to walk toward the training mat. He moved with a deliberate, unhurried pace, his presence radiating an aura of quiet authority that immediately drew every eye. The crowd of sailors almost unconsciously parted for him, creating a clear path. In his hand was a tablet displaying the day's training roster. His weathered face revealed nothing as he approached, but his eyes, fixed now on Harrison, held the cold intensity of absolute certainty. The day of reckoning had arrived, and with it a truth that could no longer be silenced. Master Chief Sullivan stopped directly in front of Captain Harrison. The silence hanging over the training ground had transformed from shock into something heavier, anticipation mixed with dread. Sullivan's weathered face betrayed no emotion, but his eyes held the weight of judgment as he looked from Harrison to the tablet in his hand, then to Kowalski, who remained at parade rest, her breathing as steady as if she'd been standing in formation rather than subduing a man twice her size. Captain Sullivan said, his voice a low, measured rumble that carried across the hushed gathering. You asked a question about Petty Officer Kowalski's training. I believe I have the answer for you right here. He held up the tablet, his callous thumb scrolling through what appeared to be a personnel file. Harrison's face flushed, then paled in rapid succession, his authority suddenly uncertain in the presence of this living legend of naval special warfare. Master Chief, this was a scheduled training exercise. Harrison began, attempting to reassert control of the situation. Sullivan cut him off with a slight raise of his hand, a gesture so subtle yet so definitive that Harrison fell immediately silent. The decades of operational authority behind that small movement were unmistakable. Before we continue this training exercise, Sullivan said, emphasizing the words with quiet skepticism, perhaps we should clarify exactly who is doing the training here. The crowd of sailors shifted uncomfortably. They were witnessing something rare and unsettling, the disruption of the chain of command, the public challenging of a superior officer. But they also recognized that Sullivan's intervention carried its own kind of authority, not from rank, but from respect earned in the crucible of combat. Sullivan looked back at the tablet, deliberately taking his time. When he spoke again, his voice had dropped even lower, forcing everyone to lean in slightly to hear. Name Kowalski Alexandra, Petty Officer First Class. He paused, letting the simple identification hang in the air. Then he continued, his voice dropping even lower. Unit Naval Special Warfare Development Group. A wave of shock rippled through the crowd. Not SEAL Team 2 or 4, not even a regular SEAL team. DevGru, the elite of the elite, the unit popularly known as SEAL Team 6, the quiet professionals who existed in the shadows, the tip of the spear, the direct action arm of Joint Special Operations Command. They were myths whispered about in barracks and mess halls. And one of them was standing right here on this training mat, being publicly berated by a surface warfare captain who clearly had no idea who or what he was dealing with. The blood drained completely from Harrison's face. He looked from Sullivan to Kowalski, his eyes wide with dawning, sickening horror. The world he thought he understood, a world of clear hierarchies and predictable outcomes, was dissolving before his eyes. He had not just made a mistake, he had committed a sacrilege. Sullivan wasn't finished. He continued to read from the tablet, his voice a relentless litany of accomplishment that systematically dismantled every one of Harrison's assumptions. Combat Deployment 7. He let that number sink in. 7 tours in the most hostile environments on the planet. Awards, he continued, his eyes still locked on Harrison, include the Silver Star. Another collective gasp from the sailors. The Silver Star, the third highest military combat decoration awarded for gallantry in action against an enemy of the United States. It was an award that spoke of unbelievable courage under fire. Also awarded 2 Bronze Stars with V, Device for Valor, a Purple Heart, a Joint Service Commendation Medal. The list captain goes on for another page. He let the tablet drop to his side. Her mission classifications are of course redacted. Her specific skill sets are redacted. Her operational history is redacted. Because professionals like Petty Officer Kowalski don't put their accomplishments on a billboard. They prove them in silence, in the dark, a long, long way from here. Harrison stood frozen, unable to formulate a response. His mouth opened and closed without producing sound, like a fish suddenly finding itself on dry land. The foundations of his reality had just been shattered, and he was struggling to reassemble them into something that made sense. Sullivan turned to Gunnery Sergeant Reynolds, who had recovered enough to rise to one knee, still rubbing his neck where Kowalski's arm had applied the chokehold. "You all right, Gunny?" Sullivan asked, professional concern in his voice. Reynolds nodded, a grim smile forming. "Yes, Master Chief. Haven't been put to sleep that fast since Fallujah 2004. Textbook technique." He looked at Kowalski with newfound professional respect. "Ma'am, that was outstanding execution." Sullivan nodded, then turned back to Harrison. "Captain, I believe this training exercise has accomplished its objective. Wouldn't you agree?" Before Harrison could respond, Sullivan turned and walked toward Kowalski. The crowd parted again, eyes following his movement with rapt attention. He stopped directly in front of her. She remained at parade rest, her expression unchanged, her eyes focused middle distance. Sullivan studied her for a long moment, seeing not her gender or her eyes, but the invisible weight of the trident she wore, the emblem of a community forged in suffering and sacrifice. In a gesture that sent a shock wave through the entire command structure present, Master Chief Sullivan, a man whose senior officers addressed with deference, snapped to attention and rendered a crisp, perfect salute. "Petty Officer Kowalski," he said, his voice now imbued with a formal respect that was more damning to Harrison than any shout could ever be. "Your professionalism is a credit to the command." Kowalski returned the salute with equal precision. "Thank you, Master Chief." It was one of the few times anyone had heard her speak, and her voice was as calm and controlled as the rest of her. The assembled sailors watched in awe as decades of tradition and hierarchy were both honored and redefined in that simple exchange. Sullivan then turned his gaze back to Captain Harrison, his expression now one of profound disappointment. "Captain," he said, his voice returning to its cold, cutting edge, "you made an assumption today. You assumed gender was a measure of strength. You assumed silence was a measure of lethality. You assumed silence was a measure of weakness. You were wrong on all counts." Harrison stood rigid, enduring the public rebuke with no visible response beyond the muscle twitching in his jaw. "What you just witnessed from Petty Officer Kowalski was not a fight," Sullivan continued. "It was a lesson. It was a masterclass in de-escalation and control. She neutralized a threat, a man who outweighs her by 100 pounds, without causing a single lasting injury. She used minimum necessary force. That is not weakness, Captain. That is the standard to which we all should aspire. She is the standard." He let the words hang in the hot, still air, an epitaph for a captain's arrogance. Sullivan glanced at his watch. "I believe this concludes today's demonstration." Dismissed. The crowd dispersed quickly, eager to escape the uncomfortable tension, but already buzzing with whispered conversations. Within hours, the story would spread throughout the base like wildfire, growing with each retelling until it achieved the status of modern legend. Kowalski quietly gathered her gear, seemingly unaffected by the drama that had unfolded around her. As the training ground emptied, only 3 figures remained. Sullivan, Harrison, and Kowalski herself, each locked in a silent tableau that represented past, present, and future of the Naval Special Warfare community. Sullivan was the first to break the silence. "Captain Harrison, a word in private." Harrison nodded stiffly and followed Sullivan toward the Humvee, leaving Kowalski alone on the training mat. As they walked, Harrison's mind raced through the implications of what had just occurred. His career, built on careful adherence to protocol and political acumen, now teetered on the edge of ruin. One wrong move, one misplaced word could send it tumbling into the abyss. When they were out of earshot, Sullivan stopped and turned to face him. "James," he said, dropping rank in a rare moment of personal address. "Do you recognize the name Michael Sullivan?" Harrison frowned, confusion momentarily replacing anxiety. "Your son, Lieutenant SEAL Team 3, killed in action in Afghanistan 221. I attended the memorial service. Sullivan nodded slowly. Do you know who was with him when he died? Harrison shook his head. The after-action report indicated he was alone covering the extraction of his team. He held off enemy forces long enough for the helicopter to evacuate the wounded. Posthumous Navy Cross. That's the official story, Sullivan said, his eyes suddenly distant. It's not the complete story. Harrison felt a cold dread spreading through his chest. I don't understand. 4 years ago, you received an unusual after-action report from a mission in Helmand Province. A mission that went sideways. A mission where the impossible happened. A single operator extracted a critically wounded teammate through enemy-held territory. Harrison's face drained of color as memory collided with present reality. That report came across your desk at CENTCOM. Sullivan continued, his voice dropping to a near whisper. You altered it. You removed a name. You buried the truth because it didn't fit your worldview. How could you possibly know that? Harrison whispered. Because the wounded operator was my son, and the person who saved him, who kept him alive for 18 hours behind enemy lines, who gave him a chance to say goodbye to his wife and newborn daughter, was Alexandra Kowalski. Harrison felt as if the ground beneath his feet had suddenly disappeared. The implications crashed over him like a tsunami, washing away the last vestiges of his carefully constructed reality. Michael lived long enough to tell me the truth, Sullivan said, his voice raw with emotion for the first time. He made me promise to make it right, to make sure she received the recognition she deserved. But by then the official record was sealed. The narrative was established, a narrative you created. Sullivan stepped closer, his voice dropping even further. So I've spent the last 4 years keeping track of Petty Officer Kowalski, watching as her career was systematically hindered by the ripple effects of your decision, watching as she continued to serve with distinction despite being denied the recognition she earned with blood. Harrison struggled to find words. I didn't know. I thought the report seemed impossible. No single operator could have. You didn't think, Sullivan cut him off. You reacted based on prejudice, not evidence. And that reaction had consequences. Real consequences for real people. Harrison looked back toward the training ground where Kowalski was collecting her gear. Does she know about your son? About what I did? Sullivan shook his head. No, and she won't hear it from me, or from you. His eyes hardened. But you will make this right, James, starting now. How? Harrison asked, a genuine question from a man whose certainties had just been obliterated. You're about to find out, Sullivan replied, nodding toward the approaching figure of Kowalski, who had been summoned by a junior officer. Petty Officer Kowalski approached with the same measured stride that characterized her every movement. No wasted energy, no unnecessary haste. When she reached them, she snapped to attention. Master Chief? Captain, you requested my presence. At ease, Petty Officer, Sullivan said. Captain Harrison has something he'd like to discuss with you. Harrison felt Sullivan's expectant gaze like a physical weight. He cleared his throat, struggling to find appropriate words. Petty Officer Kowalski, he began, his voice uncharacteristically tentative. I owe you an apology. My behavior today was unprofessional and unbecoming of an officer. I made assumptions about your capabilities that were incorrect. Kowalski's expression remained neutral, but something flickered in her eyes. Not triumph or vindication, but a subtle reassessment, as if she were recalibrating her understanding of the man before her. Understood, sir, she said simply. Harrison waited for more. Some acknowledgement of the magnitude of his admission, some indication that his apology had been accepted. But Kowalski offered nothing further. For her, the matter appeared to be closed. A professional exchange concluded with professional efficiency. Her response, or lack thereof, struck Harrison more profoundly than any rebuke could have. In that moment, he realized that for a true professional like her, his opinion, whether good or bad, was ultimately irrelevant. The work was all that mattered. Sullivan broke the uncomfortable silence. Petty Officer Kowalski, I'd like to speak with you about the upcoming Joint Readiness exercise. Your expertise would be valuable in the planning phase. Of course, Master Chief. My office Aero 800 tomorrow. I'll be there. With that brief exchange, Kowalski was dismissed, leaving the two senior leaders alone again. They watched her walk away, her posture perfect, her pace unhurried. She doesn't care, Harrison said quietly, a note of wonder in his voice. About what? Sullivan asked. About what I think. about what anyone thinks. She just does the job. Sullivan nodded slowly. Now you're beginning to understand. As the sun dipped lower toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the training ground, Harrison felt something shifting inside him. The first tremors of a seismic change in perspective that would alter the course of his remaining career and perhaps his life. The truth he had tried to silence had finally been heard, and its echo would resonate far beyond this single afternoon on a sun-baked training mat. In a secure conference room, deep within the Pentagon, 4 military officers and 3 civilian officials sat around a polished oak table. The room was spartanly furnished and its walls bare, except for the seal of the Department of Defense and a large monitor currently displaying a classified file header. Admiral Jonathan Westfield, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, studied the tablet before him, his expression grave. "Are we certain about this intelligence?" The civilian from the National Security Agency nodded. "Confirmed through 3 separate channels, sir. The target is present at the location, but the window is narrow, 48 hours at most." Westfield looked up at the others. "This is the closest we've come in 5 years. We can't afford to miss this opportunity." Colonel Marcus Daniels from Joint Special Operations Command leaned forward. "We're prepared to action this immediately, sir. I have a team on standby." "Conventional team?" Westfield asked. Daniels hesitated. "Given the sensitivity and complexity, I'd recommend Task Force Ghost." A heavy silence fell over the room. Task Force Ghost was a classified special mission unit composed of operators drawn from the most elite special operations communities. Their existence was known to only a handful of people in the U.S. government. "Ghost has been problematic recently," said General Howard Peterson, the Army representative. "After the Afghanistan incident, that incident saved 12 hostages," Daniels interrupted sharply. "And the only reason it's considered problematic is because of political fallout, not operational effectiveness." Westfield raised a hand to silence the brewing argument. "The Afghanistan operation achieved its primary objective, but at significant cost. We lost most of a team." "Most but not all," Daniels replied quietly. "And the sole survivor is the reason we got everyone out." The NSA civilian frowned. "You're referring to the female operator, the one whose presence violated deployment protocols at the time?" Daniels fixed him with a hard stare. "I'm referring to the operator who completed the mission despite catastrophic circumstances and saved every hostage. Gender is irrelevant to that fact." Westfield tapped his tablet thoughtfully. "Where is that operator now?" "Petty Officer Kowalski is currently stationed at Coronado," Daniels replied. "Ostensibly as training cadre, but that's her cover assignment." "Is she operational?" "Fully. In fact, she's Ghost Team's most experienced remaining member." Westfield considered this information, weighing operational necessity against political considerations. Finally, he looked up at the screen where the classified file was displayed. "Show me her complete service record." "Unredacted." The screen changed to display a personnel file with a small photograph in the corner. The face of Alexandra Kowalski stared back at them. Not in her current naval uniform, but in full combat gear, her features partially obscured by camouflage paint and dirt, her eyes holding the 1,000-yard stare of someone who had seen things that could never be fully explained to those who hadn't been there. As the senior officials examined the file, expressions of surprise, skepticism, and reluctant admiration crossed their faces. The list of operations commendations and skill qualifications scrolled on for page after page. "This is extensive," General Peterson admitted, "and most of it happened despite systematic efforts to limit her advancement," Daniels added pointedly. "Imagine what she could have accomplished with actual institutional support." Westfield closed the file and looked around the table. "The target window is closing. We need to make a decision now. Colonel Daniels, contact Task Force Ghost. Use whatever assets you deem necessary, including Petty Officer Kowalski." He stood signaling the end of the meeting. "I want updates every 6 hours. This one matters." As the officials filed out of the room, the screen reverted to a classified operation designation, Silent Scepter. Below it, a single line of text indicated the target location, Eastern Ukraine, Russian-occupied territory. Another piece was moving on the chessboard, one that would intersect with the drama unfolding at Naval Base Coronado in ways none of them could yet anticipate. The morning after the training ground incident, Alexandra Kowalski rose at 04:30, as she did every day. Her on-base housing unit was spartanly furnished, functional, organized, devoid of personal touches except for a single photograph on her bedside table. The image showed four men in combat gear, their faces partially obscured, arms around each other's shoulders. Ghost team before the Afghanistan mission that had claimed their lives. Her morning routine was precisely calibrated, 45 minutes of yoga and meditation, focusing on breath control and mental centering. 30 minutes of targeted strength training, a cold shower, a high-protein breakfast consumed while reviewing the day's objectives. By 0600, she was already at the base gym, working through a specialized training protocol designed to maintain the unique balance of strength, flexibility, and endurance her role required. The gym was nearly empty at this hour. A few dedicated Marines on one side, a cluster of junior officers preparing for physical readiness tests on the other. None approached or acknowledged her, which was exactly how she preferred it. Anonymity was both professional necessity and personal comfort. As she completed her final set of weighted pull-ups, she sensed rather than saw someone enter her peripheral vision. She lowered herself to the ground with a controlled precision and turned to find Seaman Lisa Parker standing nearby, a mixture of nervousness and determination on her young face. "Petty Officer Kowalski," Parker began, coming to attention. "May I speak with you, ma'am?" Kowalski assessed the young sailor. 24 years old, ambitious, intelligent, and clearly intimidated, despite her effort to appear confident. She nodded once and gestured toward a quiet corner of the gym. "What can I do for you, Seaman Parker?" she asked, her voice neither friendly nor unwelcoming, simply neutral, professional. "Ma'am, I witnessed yesterday's training exercise." Parker hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "What you did was incredible. I've never seen anything like it." Kowalski remained silent, waiting for the actual question that inevitably followed such statements. "I was wondering," Parker continued, her confidence growing slightly in the face of Kowalski's patient silence. "I'm applying for the Officer Candidate School's selection board next month, and I was hoping maybe you could give me some advice about what it takes to succeed in specialized roles." The careful phrasing told Kowalski that Parker knew or suspected more than she was letting on about Kowalski's actual position. Intelligence, discretion, and initiative, all good qualities. "What's your fitness evaluation score?" Kowalski asked. 92, ma'am. "Not good enough, needs to be perfect. What's your weakest area?" Parker blinked at the directness. "Upper body strength, ma'am. Meet me here tomorrow, 0530. Bring a notebook and proper gym attire." Parker's eyes widened. "Yes, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am." Kowalski nodded once, dismissing her. As the young sailor walked away, trying unsuccessfully to contain her excitement, Kowalski felt an unexpected echo of memory. Herself 10 years earlier, approaching Master Chief Sullivan with the same nervous determination, asking for guidance that would ultimately change the course of her life. Before she could examine this parallel further, her secure phone vibrated with an alert. The message was brief and encoded in a way only certain operators would understand. 0800 meeting canceled. Report to Seskif Delta immediately. Seskif, sensitive compartmented information facility. The message could only mean one thing: operational tasking. She erased the message, completed her cool-down routine with the same methodical precision as always, and proceeded to the shower facilities. 20 minutes later, she approached a nondescript building near the administrative section of the base. The guard at the entrance, a senior petty officer with the hard eyes of someone who had seen combat, checked her identification and biometrics before allowing her to enter. Inside, she was escorted through multiple security checkpoints until she reached a reinforced door marked simply D. The room beyond contained a secure video conferencing system and 3 people: Master Chief Sullivan, a colonel she recognized as JSOC liaison Marcus Daniels, and surprisingly, Captain Harrison. Their presence together in a skiff suggested something significant was underway. "Petty Officer Kowalski," Colonel Daniels greeted her. "Thank you for coming on short notice." She came to attention. "Sir?" "At ease. Please have a seat." As she sat, she noticed Harrison watching her with an expression she couldn't quite interpret, something between discomfort and reassessment. She filed the observation away and focused on Colonel Daniels, who was activating the secure communication system. "We're connecting to Pentagon and Skiff Tango 7, he explained. "Classification level is TSSCI Ghost Protocol, the highest possible security classification." Kowalski's mind immediately shifted into operational mode, all personal considerations set aside. The screen flickered to life, revealing Admiral Westfield himself. The presence of the chairman of the Joint Chiefs indicated an operation of extraordinary sensitivity or strategic importance. "Good morning," the Admiral began without preamble. "I'll be brief. We have confirmed intelligence on Armand Vetrov's location." Kowalski maintained her neutral expression, but internally the name triggered an immediate cascade of memories and emotions. Armand Vetrov, the Russian intelligence operative responsible for the ambush that had killed her team in Afghanistan. The man she had been hunting officially and unofficially for 4 years. "The window is narrow, 36 hours remaining," Westfield continued. "We need Ghost Team to action this." "Sir," Daniels interjected, "Ghost Team is currently at minimum strength. We have 3 operators available, including Petty Officer Kowalski." Westfield nodded. "I'm aware of the limitations. This will be a surgical insertion with minimal footprint. Primary objective is confirmation and, if viable, elimination of the target. Secondary objective is acquisition of Vetrov's electronic devices, his laptop specifically, which we believe contains critical intelligence on Russian operations in Eastern Europe." He looked directly at Kowalski through the screen. "Petty Officer, given your history with the target and your familiarity with the operational environment, I'm designating you as team lead for this mission. Colonel Daniels will provide tactical support and coordination. Master Chief Sullivan will handle exfiltration planning." Kowalski's face remained impassive, but her mind was already processing the implications, calculating variables, identifying potential failure points. "Understood, sir. What about Captain Harrison's role?" Harrison shifted uncomfortably as all eyes turned to him. "Captain Harrison has unique insight into the region's naval activity patterns," Westfield replied carefully. "He'll be providing intelligence support for your infiltration corridor." The subtext was clear. Harrison was being included as a form of rehabilitation, a chance to contribute positively to an operation involving an operator he had previously dismissed and denigrated. It was both opportunity and penance. "The full briefing package is being transmitted now," Westfield concluded. "Wheels up at 1900 hours. The mission is authorized at the highest levels. Questions?" "No, sir," Kowalski replied. "Good hunting, Petty Officer." The screen went dark. For a moment, the room was silent as each person processed what had just occurred. Kowalski's mind was already 7 steps ahead, mentally preparing for what promised to be a high-risk operation in hostile territory. Colonel Daniels broke the silence. "Alex, I know this is personal for you. Vetrov was responsible for—" "With respect, sir," she interrupted quietly, "it's not personal. It's professional. He's a target. The mission is the priority." Daniel studied her for a moment, then nodded, accepting her statement at face value, though clearly not entirely convinced. "The briefing materials will be available in 20 minutes, he said. "I suggest you all prepare accordingly. We'll reconvene at 1100 to begin operational planning." As they rose to leave, Sullivan caught Kowalski's eye and gestured for her to remain behind. Once they were alone, his professional demeanor softened slightly. "Alex," he said, using her first name, something he did only in private and only when the matter was personal rather than operational. "Are you sure you're ready for this? Vetrov isn't just any target." She met his gaze steadily. "I've been ready for 4 years, Master Chief." "That's what concerns me." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Vengeance is a dangerous companion on an operation like this." "This isn't about vengeance," she replied. "It's about completing the mission Ghost Team started 4 years ago. It's about honoring them by finishing what we began together." Sullivan studied her face, searching for signs of the emotional turmoil that would compromise any operator's effectiveness. He found none, only the calm, controlled focus that had made her one of the most effective assets in the special operations community. "Michael would be proud," he said finally, the rare mention of his son's name carrying the weight of all that remained unspoken between them. "Of who you've become, of what you've accomplished despite everything." For a brief moment, something flickered behind Kowalski's carefully maintained composure. A flash of genuine emotion quickly controlled, but not before Sullivan had glimpsed it. "I couldn't save him," she said quietly, "but I made sure he didn't die alone." Sullivan nodded, unable to find words adequate to respond to the simple truth of her statement. 1100 hours, he said, finally returning to the professional distance that defined their working relationship. Be prepared to outline your initial tactical approach. Yes, Master Chief. As Sullivan left the skiff, Kowalski remained seated, allowing herself 30 seconds to process the personal aspects of the mission before compartmentalizing them away. Armin Vetrov, the ghost she had chased through 4 years of nightmares, the architect of her team's destruction, now within reach. She closed her eyes and took a single deep breath, centering herself in the moment. When she opened them again, all traces of personal involvement had vanished. What remained was only the cool analytical focus of a Tier 1 operator preparing to execute a mission of the highest strategic importance. Alexandra Kowalski rose from her chair and headed for the door. Ghost Team had unfinished business, and she was the last one standing to complete it. The clock was ticking. The air inside the C-17 Globemaster thrummed with the steady drone of engines. Cruising at 30,000 feet somewhere over the Atlantic, the massive military transport aircraft carried its human cargo toward a destiny measured in blood and secrets. In the dimly lit cargo hold, Alexandra Kowalski sat perfectly still, her eyes closed, her breathing measured. To an outside observer, she might have appeared to be sleeping, but the two operators seated across from her knew better. She was cycling through mental rehearsals of the mission ahead, visualizing approach vectors, contingencies, extraction scenarios, a meditative practice that elite warriors had employed since ancient times. Senior Chief Petty Officer Nathan Drake and Chief Petty Officer Kara Winters watched their team leader with quiet respect. Both were DevGru operators with multiple combat deployments, yet both recognized that Kowalski existed in a rarefied atmosphere, even within their elite community. The mission briefing had made it clear why she had been selected to lead this operation. She was the last survivor of the original Ghost Team and the only operator alive who had seen Armin Vetrov face to face. Captain Harrison sat several feet away, separated not just by physical distance, but by the invisible gulf between operators and support personnel. His role in the mission was necessary but peripheral, analyzing naval movement patterns to identify the safest infiltration corridor to the target. Throughout the pre-mission briefing, he had been subdued, his usual commanding presence diminished by the gravitational pull of the three silent professionals who would actually execute the mission. Master Chief Sullivan approached from the front of the aircraft and took a seat beside Harrison. 3 hours to Ramstein, he said. From there, you'll take a smaller transport to the staging area. Harrison nodded, studying the three operators. They don't look worried, he observed quietly. Sullivan followed his gaze. They're not. This is what they're built for. Even knowing the stakes, the risks, especially knowing those things, Sullivan replied. Uncertainty is what creates fear. These three have eliminated as many variables as possible. What remains is simply execution. Harrison's eyes lingered on Kowalski. I still can't believe what I did, how I treated her. That's good, Sullivan said bluntly. Remember that feeling. Use it to check your assumptions going forward. A silence fell between them, filled only by the aircraft's persistent drone. Harrison broke it with a question he had been holding since the mission was activated. The file mentioned Kowalski was present when your son died. Did you know that when you came to her defense on the training ground? Sullivan's weathered face remained impassive. Yes. And you never told her you knew. What purpose would that serve? Sullivan asked. To burden her with my grief, to make her feel she owed me something. No. We honor the dead by continuing the mission, Captain, not by dwelling on what can't be changed. Harrison absorbed this, recognizing a philosophy forged in decades of combat operations, a perspective fundamentally different from his own experience of military service. I've spent 20 years managing perceptions and navigating politics, Harrison admitted. They've spent 20 years managing life and death. I'm not sure those two worlds can ever truly understand each other. They can, Sullivan said, when both sides make the effort. He stood, ending the conversation with the finality common to men accustomed to decisive action. Get some rest, Captain. Your part in this is just beginning. As Sullivan moved away, Harrison watched Kowalski continue her silent preparations, struck by the profound discipline evident in her stillness. For the first time in his career, he found himself questioning not just his assumptions about her, but about the entire framework through which he had viewed military service leadership and the measure of professional worth. The plane continued eastward through the night, carrying its cargo of warriors and witnesses toward a reckoning long overdue. In the mountains of eastern Ukraine, in a hunting lodge requisitioned by Russian military intelligence, Armen Vetrov stood by a window watching snow accumulate in the darkness. At 49, he carried the lean, predatory physique of a man who had spent a lifetime in the shadows. His close-cropped hair had gone silver at the temples, adding distinction to features that might otherwise have been forgettable, a necessary quality in his profession. Behind him, 3 bodyguards maintained their positions around the room, their attention divided between the entry points and the 2 Ukrainian separatist commanders seated at a long wooden table. The meeting had lasted 4 hours, a tedious but necessary negotiation over the movement of certain materials through territory nominally controlled by the separatists, but increasingly contested by Ukrainian special forces. "Our agreement is concluded then," Vetrov said in flawless Ukrainian, turning from the window. "The shipments will proceed as scheduled, and your percentage remains as discussed." The older of the 2 commanders, a bullish man with a scar bisecting his left eyebrow, nodded reluctantly. "And the additional security you promised will be in place within 48 hours, Vetrov assured him. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have other matters requiring my attention." The dismissal was polite but absolute. The commanders gathered their papers and, escorted by one of the bodyguards, left the lodge to return to their encampment in the valley below. When they had gone, Vetrov turned to his senior security officer. "Preparations for departure." "On schedule, sir. Transport arrives at 0600 day after tomorrow. The naval vessel will be in position by the time we reach the coast." Vetrov nodded, satisfied. "And our American friends, any unusual activity?" "Satellite coverage has increased over the region, but that's consistent with their patterns this time of year. Nothing to suggest they're aware of your presence." "Good." Vetrov moved to a leather briefcase sitting on the table and removed a laptop, securing it with a biometric lock. "I'll be working for the next few hours. No disturbances except for emergency communications from Moscow." "Understood, sir." As his security team took up their positions outside the study door, Vetrov settled into the quiet solitude he preferred for his most sensitive work. The laptop contained intelligence that would reshape the strategic balance in Eastern Europe, the culmination of years of careful cultivation and manipulation. He allowed himself a small smile of satisfaction. In 48 hours, he would be back in Moscow, his operation complete, his standing with the Intelligence Directorate further enhanced. The Americans would learn of it eventually, of course, but by then it would be too late to matter. What Armen Vetrov could not know, what no amount of planning or security could reveal to him, was that death was already winging its way toward him across the Atlantic, wearing the face of a woman he had once left for dead in the mountains of Afghanistan. The staging area was a nondescript warehouse on the outskirts of a small Romanian city near the Ukrainian border. Vehicles with diplomatic plates were parked inside, shielded from satellite surveillance. Equipment cases lined one wall, containing communication gear, weapons, specialized infiltration tools, and the various accoutrements of modern covert warfare. Kowalski stood with Drake and Winters around a digital terrain map, finalizing their approach plan. Their faces glowed in the blue light of the display as they traced routes with practiced precision. "We'll insert here," Kowalski indicated, marking a point in the heavily forested mountains. "Ho-Ho jumped from 30,000 feet using these ridgelines for concealment during descent. LZ is 8 kilometers from the target." Drake nodded. "Weather forecast. Snow continuing through tomorrow night. Cloud cover at 8,000 feet. Visibility limited. Works in our favor for the insertion, but we'll need to adjust our night vision accordingly." Winters traced a path from the landing zone to the target. "Overland movement through here. That drainage looks marshy." "It is," Kowalski confirmed, "but the alternative routes have regular security patrols, better to deal with difficult terrain than human contact." Captain Harrison approached, cautiously aware of his status as an outsider to this tight-knit operational planning. He carried a tablet displaying maritime traffic data. "Petty Officer Kowalski," he said formally, "I have the naval intelligence you requested." Kowalski acknowledged him with a nod. "What's the verdict on our exfil corridor?" "There's a Russian patrol vessel scheduled to pass through this area during your projected extraction window," Harrison indicated on the map. "But I've identified an alternative route that should provide a clear path to the extraction point." Kowalski studied the data with the focused attention she brought to all operational details. After a moment, she nodded. "Good work, Captain. This will work." The acknowledgement was professional rather than personal, an operator validating useful intelligence regardless of its source. Harrison felt a strange sense of accomplishment at her approval, so different from the deference he was accustomed to receiving based solely on rank. Here in this warehouse, thousands of miles from the comfortable hierarchies of naval base life, only capability mattered. It was a humbling but clarifying realization. "Is there anything else you need from me?" he asked. "Yes," Kowalski replied, surprising him. "You'll be monitoring naval movements during the operation. If anything changes, even something that seems minor, I need immediate notification. Seconds matter in extraction scenarios." "You'll have it," Harrison promised, recognizing the responsibility she was entrusting to him, a responsibility measured in the lives of her team. As Harrison returned to his communication station, Master Chief Sullivan entered the warehouse returning from a meeting with local intelligence assets. His expression was grim as he approached Kowalski. "We have confirmation on Vetrov's security detail," he said without preamble. 6 operators, former Spetsnaz, all with combat experience in Syria or Ukraine, plus the 2 separatist commanders and their personal guards. Kowalski absorbed this information with no change in expression. Timeline: Vetrov is scheduled to depart the lodge at 100 day after tomorrow. He'll be transported by helicopter to a naval vessel waiting off the coast. Our window closes when that helicopter arrives. "So we go tonight," Kowalski concluded. Sullivan nodded. "Wheels up at 2100, HAHO insertion at 100. You'll have approximately 28 hours to infiltrate, confirm the target, execute, and reach the extraction point." "Understood." Kowalski turned to her team. "Gear check in 30 minutes. Final briefing at 2000. We move exactly as planned." As Drake and Winters moved to prepare their equipment, Sullivan took Kowalski aside, speaking in a voice too low for others to hear. "Alex," he said, the use of her first name signaling the personal nature of his concern, "I need to know you're clear on the parameters. Primary objective: confirmation and elimination of Armand Vetrov. Secondary objective: acquisition of intelligence materials," she recited. "And if the secondary objective compromises the primary?" Her eyes met his, steady and resolute. "Mission first. Alwyn." Sullivan studied her for a long moment, searching for any sign that personal vendetta might cloud her judgment. Finding none, he nodded once. "Bring yourself and your team home, Ghost. That's an order." "Yes, Master Chief." As they prepared for departure, Harrison watched the methodical precision with which the 3 operators checked their gear, the careful attention to every strap, every piece of communications equipment, every weapon component. There was something almost meditative in their thoroughness, a ritual that seemed to separate them from the chaos and uncertainty of the world into which they would soon be inserted. Harrison approached Sullivan, keeping his voice low. "Will they make it?" Sullivan's eyes remained on Kowalski as he answered. "If anyone can complete this mission, it's her. She's the best I've ever seen, and I've seen the best for 40 years. Because of her skills. Because of who she is," Sullivan corrected. "Technical skills can be taught. What makes Alex exceptional can't be. She has something inside that can't be broken. Not by prejudice, not by politics, not by pain. It's what separates the truly elite from everyone else." Harrison absorbed this, watching as Kowalski methodically prepared for an operation that would take her behind enemy lines with minimal support and maximum risk. He thought about the countless ways he had underestimated her, the assumptions he had made based on nothing more than her gender and slight physical stature. "I've been wrong about a lot of things," he admitted quietly. "Yes," Sullivan agreed without rancor. "But you're here now. Make it count." The transport aircraft lifted off precisely at 2100 hours, carrying Ghost Team toward their rendezvous with destiny. On the ground, Harrison and Sullivan took their positions at the communications array, preparing for the long vigil of those who send warriors into darkness and pray for their return. The night enveloped the hunting lodge in a blanket of snow and silence. Guards patrolled the perimeter at regular intervals, their breath clouding in the frigid air as they stamped their feet against the cold. Inside, Armand Vetrov worked at his laptop, unaware that death approached on silent wings. 3 figures drifted through the night sky, their specialized HAHO, high-altitude, high-opening parachutes, allowing them to cover tremendous distance after jumping from the transport aircraft. Guided by advanced navigation systems, they steered toward the designated landing, using cloud cover and terrain features to mask their approach from radar and visual detection. Kowalski led the formation, her mind completely focused on the immediate task of controlling her descent through swirling snow and unpredictable mountain winds. The cold was intense at this altitude, but her specialized gear protected against the worst of it. Through night vision goggles, the world appeared in eerie shades of green, the trees and rocks below taking on an alien quality in the enhanced spectrum. The landing zone approached, a small clearing among dense pines barely large enough for 3 operators to land safely. With practiced precision, Kowalski adjusted her final approach, touching down with minimal impact and immediately collapsing her parachute to prevent it from dragging in the wind. Within seconds, Drake and Winters landed nearby, executing the same silent touchdown and equipment stowage. No words were exchanged. Using hand signals, Kowalski directed her team to cache their parachute equipment and transition to ground movement formation. Within 5 minutes of landing, Ghost Team was moving through the forest toward their objective, becoming one with the darkness and the falling snow. 8 kilometers of difficult terrain lay between them and the target, a journey that would require perfect navigation, absolute silence, and the constant vigilance needed to detect any patrols or security measures in their path. They moved as they had trained countless times, each operator covering sectors of responsibility, maintaining precise spacing, and communicating through subtle gestures rather than words. For 3 hours, they traversed the winter landscape like phantoms, leaving minimal sign of their passage. When they encountered the marshy drainage Winters had identified during planning, they moved through it without hesitation, accepting the discomfort of cold water seeping through their clothing as a necessary price for the security of an unguarded approach. 2 kilometers from the target, Kowalski signaled a halt. Ahead, barely visible through the trees, a security patrol moved along a predetermined route. 2 armed men checking the perimeter of the lodge's extended security zone. Ghost Team melted into the underbrush, becoming indistinguishable from the forest itself as the patrol passed within 20 meters of their position. When the patrol had moved on, the team continued their approach with heightened caution. The presence of perimeter security confirmed their intelligence on the target location. Vetrov was here, the architect of so much death, the man who had orchestrated the ambush that killed Kowalski's original team, was now within reach. At the edge of the cleared area surrounding the lodge, Ghost Team established an observation position. Through high-powered optics, they studied the building layout, security patterns, and potential entry points. Kowalski confirmed the presence of 6 external guards moving in predictable patterns exactly as their intelligence had indicated. The building's windows were mostly darkened except for one on the 2nd floor where a faint glow suggested someone was still awake. Drake set up a thermal imaging device scanning the structure to identify heat signatures within. "I count 10 individuals inside," he whispered. 2 on the ground floor, likely security, 8 on the 2nd floor. 6 clustered in what appears to be sleeping quarters. 2 separated, one in what matches the study location from our intel, one stationed outside that door. Kowalski nodded, comparing this information with the building schematics they had studied during mission preparation. Everything aligned with their expectations, a rare luxury in operations of this nature. She signaled her plan they would wait until 300 hours, when human alertness typically reached its lowest point, then approach from the eastern side where the tree line extended closest to the structure. Their entry point would be a 2nd-floor window near the suspected location of Vetrov's study. Once inside, they would move directly to secure the primary target, then extract any intelligence materials before withdrawing along the same route. For the next 2 hours, Ghost Team remained motionless in their concealed position, enduring the cold and wet conditions without complaint. This was the reality of their profession: long periods of uncomfortable waiting, punctuated by brief moments of intense action. The discipline to maintain focus during these waiting periods separated elite operators from all others. At precisely 0300 hours, Kowalski gave the signal to move. Like shadows detaching from the greater darkness, the 3 operators glided across the open ground using the falling snow to further obscure their approach. They reached the eastern wall without detection and deployed a specialized climbing system that allowed them to ascend silently to the 2nd-floor window. Winters took point on the technical breach, using equipment designed to defeat the window's security features without triggering alarms. Within 40 seconds, she had created an entry path. One by one, Ghost Team slipped into the darkened corridor of the lodge's 2nd floor. The interior was warm after the frigid exterior, but the operators gave no thought to comfort. Moving in perfect coordination, weapons at the ready, They navigated toward the study, where their intelligence indicated Vetrov would be working. 2 doors from their objective, a security guard emerged from a side room, likely heading for a scheduled patrol or bathroom break. Before the man could register the presence of intruders, Drake was on him. One hand clamped over his mouth, the other driving a specialized blade precisely into the brainstem for an instant silent kill. The body was lowered noiselessly to the carpet and dragged into the room from which he had emerged. Approaching the study door, Kowalski detected the presence of the guard stationed outside. Using hand signals, she coordinated a simultaneous takedown. Winters creating a distraction at one end of the hallway, while Kowalski and Drake neutralized the sentry with the same silent efficiency. With the immediate security eliminated, Ghost Team positioned themselves for entry into the study. Kowalski took a moment to center herself, pushing away all extraneous thoughts. The history, the personal connection, the memory of her fallen teammates. What remained was only the mission, the objective, the next precisely calculated action in a sequence leading to success. On her signal, Drake breached the door while Winters covered the hallway. Kowalski entered first, weapon trained on the single figure seated at a desk across the room. Armen Vetrov looked up from his laptop, his expression registering surprise for only a fraction of a second before settling into a calm resignation that spoke of a professional recognition. He knew exactly who had come for him and why. "Americans," he said softly in accented English. "I wondered when you would find me." Kowalski advanced methodically, her weapon never wavering from its aim at the center of his chest. Hands on the desk, slowly. Vetrov complied, his movements deliberate and unhurried, his eyes pale blue and unnervingly direct, studied her face with clinical interest. "I know you," he said. "Afghanistan, 4 years ago. You were the one who escaped." Kowalski's expression revealed nothing as she maintained her professional focus. "Armen Vetrov, you are designated as a high-value target by the United States government. Surrender any weapons and identify the location of all electronic devices containing intelligence materials." A small smile touched the corners of Vetrov's mouth. So formal, so American. Always the pretense of rules in an inherently lawless business. He nodded toward the laptop on his desk. "What you seek is there. The password, naturally, I will not provide." Drake moved to secure the laptop while Kowalski kept Vetrov covered. Winters remained at the door, ensuring their perimeter security. "You killed my team," Kowalski said, her voice devoid of emotion. A simple statement of fact rather than an accusation. "Yes," Vetrov acknowledged without hesitation. "And you killed many of mine over the years. This is the business we have chosen, is it not? There is no place for moral indignation in our profession." "This isn't about morality," Kowalski replied. "It's about accountability." Vetrov's eyes narrowed slightly as he studied her. "Interesting. Most would say vengeance. But you see this differently." Target secured. Drake reported having verified Vetrov's identity against mission parameters. "Intelligence material located." Kowalski nodded. "Prepare for extraction." "You intend to take me alive?" Vetrov asked, genuine curiosity in his voice. "How ambitious?" "My security team will be conducting their next check in approximately 7 minutes. The odds of your successful extraction with a prisoner are minimal." "Who said anything about taking you prisoner?" Kowalski replied. Understanding dawned in Vetrov's eyes. Of course. Expedience always trumps process in these matters." He straightened slightly in his chair. "May I make a professional observation before you complete your mission?" Kowalski remained silent, her weapon trained unwavering on its target. "You are exceptional," Vetrov said simply. "In 27 years of operations, I have never been compromised in this manner. That you found me, reached me, and will now complete your mission speaks to a level of capability I have rarely encountered." He paused, then added, "Your government undervalues you. I recognize your potential in Afghanistan. That is why I specifically ordered my men to find and eliminate you first. The small female operator who moved like a ghost and fought like a demon." 3 minutes, Winters warned from the doorway. "Movement in the East Wing." Kowalski's focus never wavered. "Any final statement for the record?" Vetrov smiled again, a gesture devoid of warmth or fear, the acknowledgement of one professional to another. "Only this, we are not so different, you and I. We serve systems that will discard us when convenient." Remember that when your government eventually betrays you, as mine would certainly have betrayed me given enough time. We are nothing alike, Kowalski said and pulled the trigger. The sound suppressor reduced the report to a sharp pfft as the round entered precisely between Vitrov's eyes. He slumped forward dead instantly, his final expression one of professional respect rather than fear. Target eliminated, Kowalski confirmed. Secure the intelligence and prepare for exfil. Drake quickly gathered the laptop and several flash drives from the desk, securing them in a specialized pouch designed to protect electronic equipment during extraction. Winters maintained her security position at the door, reporting on movement elsewhere in the building. East Wing security is active, she whispered. They found the body. Time to move, Kowalski ordered, leading her team toward their planned extraction route. They had almost reached the window through which they had entered when the first alarm sounded, a harsh electronic wail that shattered the night silence. Shouts in Russian echoed through the quarters as the remaining security personnel mobilized to locate the intruders. Ghost Team increased their pace, moving with the controlled urgency of operators who understood that speed now outweighed stealth. They reached the window and began their descent just as the first armed responders appeared at the far end of the hallway. Gunfire erupted, bullets splintering the wooden frame around them as they disappeared into the darkness outside. Contact, Kowalski reported into her communications device as they hit the ground and sprinted for the tree line. Exfil Road Alpha compromised, shifting to Bravo. Primary objective complete. Secondary objective secured. At the communications center in Romania, Harrison and Sullivan received the transmission with mixed relief and concern. Acknowledge Ghost Lead, Sullivan responded. Extraction team is moving to Rally Point Bravo. ETA 40 minutes. Harrison studied the tactical display showing the team's position relative to known enemy forces in the area. The alarm will bring reinforcements from the valley, he noted. They need to clear this sector within 20 minutes to avoid additional contact. Sullivan nodded grimly. She knows. To the communications operator, he ordered, notify the QRF to prepare for possible hot extraction. The Quick Reaction Force, a helicopter team equipped for emergency extraction under fire, acknowledged the alert and began preparations to launch if needed. In the snowy forest, Ghost Team moved with the fluid efficiency of predators fleeing larger but slower hunters. They had trained for exactly this scenario, rapid movement through difficult terrain while pursued by numerically superior forces. Their route took them along ridge lines and through ravines, specifically chosen to maximize their speed advantage and minimize exposure to potential ambush points. Behind them, shouts and sporadic gunfire indicated the pursuit had been organized. Vehicle engines roared to life at the lodge as additional security forces mobilized to cut off the Americans' escape. 2 vehicles moving to intercept along the access road, Drake reported, monitoring their tactical display as they ran. They'll reach the valley crossing before we do. Acknowledged, Kowalski replied without breaking stride. Winters prepared to engage at Waypoint Echo. The team adjusted their route slightly, heading toward a position that would allow them to ambush the vehicles before being caught in the open. When they reached the designated waypoint, a rocky outcropping overlooking a sharp bend in the access road, they quickly set up firing positions. Minutes later, the headlights of the pursuing vehicles appeared cutting through the falling snow as they raced toward the valley crossing. When the lead vehicle reached the bend directly below their position, Winters engaged with a specialized anti-material rifle. The first round disabled the engine block of the lead vehicle. The second punctured its fuel tank, creating a roadblock that the following vehicle could not easily bypass. Men spilled from the disabled vehicles, seeking cover and returning fire toward the Americans' position. But Ghost Team was already moving again, using the brief delay they had created to extend their lead and continue toward the extraction point. Ghost Lead, this is Overwatch, Harrison's voice came through their communications. Satellite shows reinforcements inbound from the northeast. 8 minutes to intercept with your current trajectory. Kowalski processed this information instantly, recalculating their route. Understood. Adjusting course to heading 270. Notify extraction team. The new heading took them up a steeper incline, more physically demanding, but offering better concealment from the approaching reinforcements. Ghost Team pushed the pace, their physical conditioning allowing them to maintain a punishing rhythm that would have exhausted normal soldiers within minutes. 5 kilometers to extraction, Drake reported between controlled breaths. The sound of helicopter rotors echoed across the valley. the extraction team moving into position, but also a signal to all forces in the area that an American operation was underway. Their window for clean extraction was closing rapidly. Ghost Lead, be advised. Sullivan's voice crackled through their comms. Russian Quick Reaction Force has been scrambled from Severodonetsk. Fixed-wing aircraft will be in your vicinity within 15 minutes. Copy that, Kowalski acknowledged. We'll be gone by then. The team crested a ridge and caught sight of their extraction point in the valley below. A small clearing just large enough for the helicopter to touch down. They increased their pace, knowing that every second now determined the difference between clean extraction and a desperate last stand. As they descended toward the clearing, the distinctive whoomp, whoomp, whoomp of helicopter blades grew louder. The extraction aircraft, a specialized MH-47G Chinook, appeared through the swirling snow, its massive form settling into the clearing with practiced precision. Ghost Team covered the final 100 meters at a full sprint, even as shouts behind them indicated their pursuers had spotted the helicopter. Sporadic gunfire erupted from the tree line as Russian security forces attempted to prevent the extraction. The Chinook's door gunners returned suppressive fire, creating a corridor for the team to reach the aircraft. Kowalski paused at the tree line, ensuring her teammates had clear access to the helicopter before following them. As Drake and Winters reached the ramp, a round caught Drake in the left shoulder, spinning him but not stopping his forward momentum. Winters grabbed him, helping him the final few meters into the aircraft as Kowalski provided covering fire. With her team aboard, Kowalski made her own dash for the helicopter. Halfway across the clearing, a bullet kicked up snow beside her foot. Another zinged past her ear. The entire extraction was seconds from disaster as the Russian forces closed in. Reaching the ramp, she leapt aboard and signaled the pilot. Go, go, go! The Chinook lifted its powerful engines, straining as it clawed for altitude through the falling snow. Rounds pinged off its armored underbelly, but none penetrated the critical systems. Within moments, they were above the effective range of small arms fire, banking hard to the west and accelerating away from the scene of the operation. Inside the aircraft, a medic attended to Drake's wound, while Winters secured their precious intelligence cargo. Kowalski moved to the communication station and established contact with the command center. Overwatch, this is Ghost Lead. Package is secure, Eagle is down. Team extracted with one wounded, non-critical. In the Romanian warehouse, Sullivan and Harrison exchanged looks of profound relief. Roger that, Ghost Lead, Sullivan responded. Well done. Medical team standing by at landing zone. Harrison studied the satellite imagery showing the Chinook's path away from Russian airspace. They did it, he said quietly. Against all odds, they actually did it. Sullivan's weathered face revealed a hint of pride. Did you expect anything less? Honestly, yes, Harrison admitted. The operational parameters seemed almost impossible. 3 operators against a hardened target with substantial security deep in hostile territory, with minimal support in a compromised extraction. The statistical probability of success was minimal. Statistics don't account for people like Alexandra Kowalski, Sullivan replied. Some individuals defy probability through sheer force of will. Harrison nodded slowly, absorbing a lesson that would reshape his understanding of capability and leadership. I've spent my career evaluating personnel based on metrics I thought mattered. Physical size, gender conformity to traditional standards. I completely missed what actually determines success in our profession. It's never too late to learn, Sullivan said, clapping him on the shoulder before turning his attention back to coordinating the final phases of the extraction. As the Chinook thundered through the night sky towards safety, Kowalski sat beside her wounded teammate, her mission focus gradually giving way to the quiet satisfaction of completion. Vetrov was dead. The intelligence he had been gathering was now secure in American hands. And most importantly, her team was coming home alive. In the dim red lighting of the aircraft's interior, she allowed herself a rare moment of reflection. 4 years earlier, she had crawled away from an ambush in Afghanistan, carrying the wounded Lieutenant Sullivan through enemy territory while the rest of her team lay dead behind her. She had made a silent promise then, to the fallen and to herself, that their sacrifice would not be in vain, that accountability would eventually find those responsible. Today, that promise had been fulfilled. The circle was complete. The debt paid. Ghost Team's final mission was accomplished. As dawn broke over the Romanian countryside, the Chinook descended toward the secure landing zone where medical personnel waited to receive the wounded Drake. Kowalski watched the landscape emerge from darkness into light, a fitting metaphor for the transition she now faced. With Vetrov eliminated and the mission complete, what would define her path forward? The answer she knew lay not in vengeance or the past, but in the same quiet professionalism that had guided her through the most challenging circumstances of her career. There would be new missions, new teams, new operators to mentor and lead. The work continued as it always did for the quiet professionals who served in silence and shadow. The helicopter touched down gently on Romanian soil. As the ramp lowered and medical teams rushed forward to assist, Drake Kowalski caught sight of Captain Harrison and Master Chief Sullivan waiting at the edge of the landing zone. Their faces showed the complex mixture of relief, respect, and solemn recognition that accompanies the completion of high-risk operations. In that moment, with snow from a Russian mountainside still melting on her boots and the memory of Armen Vetrov's final words echoing in her mind, Petty Officer First Class Alexandra Kowalski stepped back into the world of the living, carrying with her the silent legacy of those who had fallen and the hard-won wisdom of those who endure. The true measure of a warrior, she had learned, lay not in physical stature or gender, not in rank or accolades, but in the quiet, unshakable commitment to mission and team that transcended all other considerations. It was a truth that Captain Harrison was only beginning to understand, but one that defined every aspect of her existence. As she approached those waiting officers, Kowalski straightened her posture and prepared to deliver her mission report with the same precise efficiency that characterized everything she did. The sun continued its ascent over the horizon, casting long shadows behind the three figures standing on the tarmac. Shadows that would soon fade with the advancing day, but would return again with nightfall, just as the quiet warriors of Ghost Team would return to the shadows when duty called again. For in the world of silent professionals, the mission never truly ends. It merely evolves, continuing through generations of operators, bound by the sacred trust of those who stand between civilization and chaos, asking no recognition, seeking no glory, finding purpose in the simple, profound act of service. And in that service, performed with excellence regardless of obstacles or prejudice, lay the true legacy of warriors like Alexandra Kowalski, not the lives they took, but the lives they saved, not the battles they fought, but the values they upheld, not the recognition they received, but the standard they set for all who would follow. The standard.